All right, let's jump in the Bengals war room. Looking at the offseason moves, they signed Trey Hendrickson, the defensive end from the Saints. Also got Riley Reif, an offensive tackle. A couple of departures, Carl Lawson and A.J. Green. Let's break it down with Brady Quinn and Pete Prisco, who has the Bengals winning how many of the next 9 Super Bowls? 2?
2.
No, 2.
It was always 1.
No, it was always 1. It started at 1, then
it's almost the anniversary of the 2.
You're right.
2 and 10, now 2 and 9.
It's 1.
2 and 9, Pete.
Happy anniversary, Pete. 2 and 9.
Pete, what'd you think? What'd you think of what they have done so far in free agency?
Well, I probably would have kept Carl Lawson. They decided to let him go and replace him with Trey Hendrickson. I think Lawson is a better player, even though Hendrickson had more sacks last year. They also lost William Jackson, and that's a big loss for them as well in the secondary. But they think that they replaced him with a couple of guys. And Mike Hilton's an interesting nickel corner they signed from the Steelers. But they have a lot of work to do. I mean, let's be honest about it. And particularly on the offensive side of the ball, they need a lot of help over there to kind of build that thing around Joe Burrow. But defensively, they made some solid moves. Like I said, Hendrickson is a good player. Awuzi's a solid corner. Hilton's a good corner. But again, you lose Carl Lawson and William Jackson, and I think those were good young players that they probably should have kept.
I actually like their offseason. You know, Cincinnati's not usually a big spender in free agency, and they replaced what they lost. Bringing in a guy like Trey Hendrickson, who I think still has a lot of upside to him. You know, Larry Ogunjobi is now a part of this group as well to go along with DJ Reader on the inside. And then they help, try to improve their secondary. You know, Chidobe Awuzie, I think, has some good football in him. He should fit their scheme well. Pete talked about Mike Hilton, but Ricardo Allen's a longtime vet as well. So, look, they replaced, I think, to a degree what they lost. A.J. Green really hasn't had much of an impact on this team in quite some time. The surprise is not doing much at all on offense. But that's where the draft comes in. That's where they're going to have to load up with their draft class on offensive players to help Joe Burrow. All
right, talk about that in a second, but we will talk Joe Burrow now. Obviously, the knee injury cutting his season short. It was a very promising season. What's his outlook heading into season 2? I know they wish he had more snaps under his belt, and he also has to come back from injury.
Well, the biggest thing is just coming back from the injury. I mean, that's the only thing he can control right now. So get as healthy as he can. But look, he proved that he's going to be the guy for years, moving forward. And I don't know if he'll ever win those 2 Super Bowls Pete's talking about, but he's sure as heck good enough to put them in contention, I think, get them to the playoffs. It's now about building this roster out around him. You've got Joe Burrow on his rookie deal going into his 2nd year. You need to be drafting wide receiver, tackles, offensive linemen. This entire draft in 2021 should be called the Joe Burrow draft. No, it's not when he was actually taken. It was the year after to build everything around him to ensure this never happens again. He's not injured again like this, Pete.
Yeah, it's a lot like the Chargers. Build that thing around your young quarterback and then go from there. And he, look, took a beating last year. And a lot of the times he was too stubborn and took those shots because he's the competitor. He wants to get through his reads and make plays. But you got to learn to get rid of the football when you have an offensive line like they had a year ago. But I'm with you 100%, Brady. This kid is going to be a star quarterback in this league. I think you saw glimpses of that last year, even playing with behind a bad offensive line and not so great skill people around them. So look, you guys kid me all you want. I didn't say 2 and 10. I said 1 and 10, and I'm sticking to it. 1 and 9. Joe Burrow will win 1 Super Bowl in 9 years.
It was hashtag 2 and 10.
Yeah, it started as 1 and 10, and then you doubled down. Actually, he's going to win multiple Super Bowls in the next 10 years.
It could have been more than that, really, Pete.
Yeah, it'll probably be 3 eventually. You saw that stat there with the 32 sacks for Joe Burrow. That was in just 10 games.
Right.
So he was getting sacked 3 times a game as a rookie. So we heard from Brady the needs entering the draft. He said wide receiver, tackle, offensive lineman. Pete, do you agree with that?
Oh, there's no question. It's got to be all on offense. And they need help at corner still. I think that's a position they can address at some point in this draft. But early and often, it has to be the offensive line. And, you're picking at number 5. You're going to have options there. But even if you don't take an offensive lineman at that spot, you come back and you address it a couple different times. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a perfect example. The line was good and solid, but it was really good once they added Tristan Wirfs last year. I think if you can build build the line in front of quarterbacks, it makes it a lot easier. You can run the ball with Joe Mixon. So offensive tackle, #1 priority, receiver and tight end. They also need tight end help, and I think that's something that will help make it a lot easier for the quarterback, a young quarterback like Joe Burrow.
Love it, Pete. Love everything you said there. You know, Penei Sewell, if he's not taking #5 overall, it's only because of this scenario, that potentially a guy like Kyle Pitts is there. If Kyle Pitts is there at 5, it would be really hard for me, because there's such a drop-off, I think, from Pitts to kind of everyone else with what I think Kyle Pitts will be at the next level, to pass up on that opportunity. Because I do think they can still get some tackles and interior offensive linemen in the 2nd and 3rd round. So that's the only scenario, and I think it would take, you know, 4 first-round quarterbacks going 1, 2, 3, 4 in order for that to be the case. I just think he's such a unique talent in this draft. The only problem with me saying that is I also think it's Penei Sewell and kind of every other tackle in this draft. So if they pass up on Sewell, the type of left tackle, the type of blindside left tackle they're going to get isn't going to be to that quality. But it's all about trying to figure out a way of never allowing Joe Burrow to get injured like this again, and giving him the firepower to compete within a division that, I mean, look at the quarterbacks that are in. With Baker Mayfield, the step he took last year, Lamar Jackson, a former MVP in that group. Not only do you have to play good defense, and they'll get cornerback help at some point, they've got to be able to provide them with the firepower in order to be able to compete with that.
In Ryan Wilson's latest mock, he did have quarterbacks going 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the Bengals sitting there with an option of Sewell or Pitts. He had the Bengals taking Penei Sewell. Pete, if it's an option between Sewell and Pitts, Brady says Pitts, would you agree with that?
I don't think Pitts is going to be there. I think the Falcons are going to take Pitts at 4, so I think it's going to end up being between Sewell and Jamar Chase. And to answer your question, I would take Sewell. I think you have to solidify the offensive line. And if they do take Sewell, not only is it solidify the left tackle spot, but it allows them to move Jonah Williams to right tackle, and it allows them to move Riley Reif, who they got this year in the offseason, to move him from right tackle to right guard. So it gives you 3 different guys to take over 3 new positions, and it solidifies all 3 of those spots. So in that scenario, I would take Penei Sewell, even though, and I will say this, I know most draft analysts and most people that watch him love him and think he's the next coming of Anthony Munoz. I don't see it that way. I think he's an athletic kid. He's amazing for a guy 330 pounds to be able to do what he does. But I don't see him being the dominant all-pro every year left tackle. I think he's going to be really good. I just don't think he's the next coming of Anthony Munoz.
Well, I don't know that anyone's saying he's going to be Anthony Munoz. I mean, that's probably maybe the best or the standard at the position, Pete. But I will go as far as saying this. There is a drop-off from him to everyone else in this class. Rashawn Slater, a bit more undersized for that particular spot, giving up about 15 pounds and 2 inches in height. You look at a guy like Christian Darrisaw, about similar in size, but again, kind of a one-year wonder. Penei Sewell has been dominant since he stepped on the field there at Oregon. Well coached. There's no concerns there. Pete did skip out on actually answering the question because he just said Kyle Pitts isn't going to be there. We talked about that. Here's the problem. If it is between Sewell and Jamar Chase or any other wide receiver, it's an easy decision to take Sewell again, because you have so many wide receivers in this draft where if you don't get one in the first round, you could get one in a subsequent round that's still going to be able to be either a high-flying fast player or a big-body guy like a Nico Collins out of Michigan, for example. That I think is flying way under the radar when you talk to different people around the league.
That's exactly what Ryan Wilson has the Bengals doing in his latest mock. He had him taking Sewell at #5, but then with their second pick, 38 overall in the 2nd round, has him taking Rashad Bateman, the wide receiver out of Minnesota. Pete, who do you think they should be targeting on day 2 when we get the 2nd and 3rd rounds?
By the way, when in doubt, take big people. It's usually the best way to build your team. When in doubt, take a big guy. That's why I would take Sewell over Pitts. That's why I would take Sewell over any of the wide receivers. And I agree with Brady, this is a deep wide receiver class. But if they do take, let's just say they take Penei Sewell in the 1st round, then you can come back and you can get a Kadarius Toney maybe in the 2nd round. They do need a tight end. Tommy Tremble is a guy at Notre Dame who I think was underutilized and will be a better NFL player than he was at Notre Dame in terms of catching the ball, and he's a great blocker, probably the best blocker in this draft class. And Pat Freiermuth, the other tight end from Penn State. They need to get weapons if you get the left tackle in the 1st round, but I could see where some people would say get Pitts or get Chase. I wouldn't. I'd take Penei Sewell.
Man, Pete, if they could come away with your list right here, it would be pretty big time. But I'm kind of right there with Ryan Wilson, kind of laid out a vast array of different options between the wide receiver and tight end group. Bateman is one of the guys on that list, but Elijah Moore too. I think some people might be sleeping on him and how good teams feel about him. What about a guy like Brevin Jordan, though? We've talked about Pat Freiermuth, but Brevin Jordan's an off-the-ball tight end, very similar a little bit to Tommy Tremble, but kind of did a more variety of things during his time at Miami this past season, showed out pretty well. And then Hunter Long, who's probably the next best, more traditional wide. But the last position I'll just say is if you look at this defense for the Cincinnati Bengals, they get a little bit of an upgrade there, too, at linebacker. Baron Browning, Nick Bolton, Davis as well out of Kentucky. Just a number of guys that I think if they're there in the second, third, fourth round, depending on who's off the board, what they've already taken, it'd be hard to pass up on taking one of those guys. I think their defense needs a lot of work, too.
All right, Brady Quinn and Pete Prisco on the Cincinnati Bengals got the war room for a team that finished 4-11-1 last season. Joe Burrow being injured in Game 10. Let's look at the odds for the Bengals heading into the next season. Probably going to have to win 2 Super Bowls in 8 years after this one because they are 80-1 to win the Super Bowl, 40-1 to win the AFC. Really, you're looking at potentially just making a playoff push here, plus 375 to make the postseason. Still probably a year off before the Bengals could really set their sights on a playoff berth. Want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.